"The zoo's that way," one officer sneered, jabbing a finger as his colleagues burst into laughter. The insult cracked through the courthouse steps like a whip, shameless and loud enough for the crowd to hear. Phones lifted instantly. Some people gasped, others froze, stunned that the words had been spoken at all. And there, in the center of it, stood a black man in a tailored charcoal suit, wrists bound in steel cuffs. He didn't blink. He didn't lower his head. His silence carried more weight than their noise. The officers treated it like theater, mocking, pointing, parading him as if he were entertainment. One leaned closer, grinning, "20 minutes and you're done." The laughter grew, careless and cruel. But he stood tall, unmoved, his tie straight, his eyes locked ahead, his calm thicker than the marble pillars behind him. He had lived this before. At 25, told to leave a hotel lobby because guests don't look like you. At 32, dismissed by a banker despite triple the collateral. Always the same smirk, always the same dismissal. And now, on the courthouse steps, the cycle repeated. But this time, the ending would be different. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change. And we're glad you're here, because in less than half an hour, the cuffs would fall away, and the men who mocked him with the cruelest words would discover that the one they tried to parade as a suspect was, in fact, their judge. The cuffs clinked as they tightened, but he didn't resist. His stillness was louder than their laughter. The officers grinned at the crowd, as if parading a trophy. One of them pulled out his phone, pretending to snap a picture, muttering, "Evidence for the highlight reel." The others chuckled, tugging him down the courthouse steps like it was sport. But he walked on his own. He didn't stumble. He didn't drag his feet. Each step was deliberate, measured, almost regal, like a man walking toward a seat prepared just for him. Inside the marble-lined lobby, the echo of boots and cuffs blended with the buzz of spectators. Some whispered, some recorded, some shook their heads in disbelief. A young law student near the security gate leaned toward her friend. "That's Marcus Hale," she whispered, eyes wide. "I swear I saw him in a journal article." Her friend frowned, skeptical. "If he's who you think, why's he in cuffs?" The question hung unanswered. The lead officer smirked and shoved Marcus toward a bench. "Sit tight, Professor," he mocked. "Don't wander off before your big moment." The others laughed again. Marcus sat, silent. His eyes flicked once to the clock on the far wall. 9:40 a.m., 20 minutes until session. He knew the rhythm of this place better than any of them. They didn't know that yet, but they would. Across the lobby, a woman in a gray suit tapped her phone nervously. She was his clerk, though no one recognized her. She typed a single line. "Phase 1 logged. In less than 10 seconds, a response flashed back. Systems ready." One officer noticed her and sneered. "You, his lawyer? Wrong crowd. We're not taking applications." She didn't answer. She just met Marcus's eyes for a second, long enough for him to nod once. Meanwhile, the crowd began to stir. A teenage boy filming whispered to his mother, "This doesn't feel right. Why would they cuff a man in a suit like that?" She hushed him, but her own eyes stayed fixed on Marcus. The insults continued. Another officer leaned closer, his voice pitched for the audience around them. "They should have booked your cell already. Maybe toss in a banana too." The laugh that followed was cheap, ugly. Still, Marcus didn't move. His calm unnerved them more than protest ever could. His silence became its own kind of mirror, reflecting their cruelty back at them. And then, in a moment that felt almost staged, a familiar figure walked past the metal detectors. A junior attorney recognized him instantly and blurted, louder than he meant to, "That's Judge Hale." The lobby stilled for half a beat. The officers scoffed, shaking their heads, but unease flickered in their eyes. Phones rose higher. Whispers surged like a tide. "Judge? Did he say judge?" The lead officer forced a laugh. "Yeah, right. A judge in cuffs. Nice try." He yanked Marcus's arm for emphasis, but the crowd no longer laughed with him. Marcus raised his eyes slowly, calmly. Not to the officer, not to the crowd, but to the courtroom doors just ahead. His silence said it all. He wasn't walking into humiliation. He was walking toward his bench. And in less than 20 minutes, the men who ridiculed him would be standing beneath his gavel, facing a silence they could not break. The marble lobby didn't stay quiet for long. What began as whispers was swelling into a hum of disbelief. Phones hovered in the air, cameras rolling, as the officers tightened their grip on Marcus like they were handling a threat instead of a man in polished shoes and a tailored suit. "Stop clogging up the hall," one officer barked, shoving him toward the courtroom doors. His voice carried across the chamber, sharp enough for everyone waiting in line to hear. "We've got real defendants to process, not this clown show." Gasps broke out. A man in a navy blazer muttered to his colleague, "That's not a clown. That's Judge Hale. I saw his appointment ceremony on TV last year." His words landed like sparks. Several heads turned, eyes narrowing as they studied Marcus more carefully. The lead officer scoffed, waving him off. "Yeah? Judges don't show up in handcuffs." His laugh was brittle now, less certain. But Marcus still hadn't spoken. He sat on the edge of the wooden bench they'd forced him onto, hands cuffed in front of him, posture unbroken. His silence wasn't submission, it was strategy. Across the room, a law clerk no older than 25 had started filming. His lips moved as he narrated softly into the camera. "They're cuffing a sitting federal judge, right here, in the courthouse lobby. This isn't just bias. This is systemic." One of the officers noticed and barked, "Turn that off, kid, before we confiscate it." The clerk hesitated but didn't lower his phone. The red recording light blinked like a warning siren. Then came the escalation. Another officer stepped forward, pulled Marcus's briefcase from the bench, and flipped it open like it was contraband. Legal papers spilled across the marble floor, motions, citations, schedules for the day's docket. The officer nudged them with his boot. "What kind of fraud brings props like this?" The papers scattered, but Marcus didn't move to stop him. He simply looked down, then back up, his eyes colder now. The crowd noticed. A woman near the elevators whispered, "He's letting them dig their own grave." That's when the insult came sharp and ugly. "Face it, you don't belong here," the officer said, voice raised, daring the crowd to disagree. But the crowd did disagree. A middle-aged man in line for security finally spoke up. "You don't get to say who belongs in this courthouse, especially not to him," his words echoed, pulling a ripple of agreement through the lobby. Marcus's silence held the center of it all, steady as a gavel not yet struck. He didn't need to raise his voice. The room was already speaking for him, and in less than 15 minutes, those same officers would discover just how badly they had misjudged the man they tried to parade in chains. The air in the lobby was no longer neutral. It was charged, every word, every movement carrying weight. The papers scattered on the marble floor lay like evidence of something bigger than paperwork. The officers still grinned, but the edges of their bravado were fraying. One of them leaned in close, his voice dripping with contempt. "Men like you don't walk into courtrooms unless it's in shackles." He tugged at Marcus's cuffs, as if to punctuate the insult. Another officer laughed too loudly, forcing a confidence he no longer felt. Marcus didn't answer. He sat straighter, the red mark of steel around his wrists catching the lobby's fluorescent light. His silence wasn't empty, it was deliberate. Each second he refused to rise to their bait, made the crowd more aware of just how wrong this scene looked. From the corner, the young law clerk who had been filming spoke up. His voice cracked, but he didn't stop. "This isn't procedure. This is harassment. Everyone here can see it." Phones lifted higher. A chorus of whispers followed. "He's right. Why is this happening?" The lead officer barked, "Quiet! This man is a fraud. Playing dress-up with a suit and a briefcase doesn't make you a judge." He kicked one of the spilled files across the floor, the motion echoing through the hall. That's when a woman in a navy pantsuit finally stepped forward. She had been silent until now, hands gripping her purse with fury. Her voice cut the tension clean. "You're humiliating the wrong man." The lobby stilled. Even the officers faltered. "And who exactly is he?" one demanded, tone mocking but his eyes uncertain. The woman didn't flinch. "Judge Marcus Hale, appointed last year. You're about to march him into his own courtroom in chains." The silence that followed was suffocating. A ripple of recognition moved through the crowd. Someone gasped. Someone else whispered, "I knew he looked familiar." The lead officer forced a laugh, louder than before, desperate now. "Lies. Judges don't sit cuffed on benches. He's just another con." He gestured to his partner. "Call security. Have him removed before this circus grows." But the circus had already grown. The crowd was no longer passive. Phones were steady, murmurs sharpened into outrage. A man near the metal detector said it plain, "We're watching you destroy your own careers in real time." Marcus didn't move. He didn't need to. The room itself was shifting. Every insult, every shove, every laugh was stacking against the officers, and with less than 10 minutes until session, the stage was set. The cuffs would soon be unlocked, not as an act of mercy, but as a revelation of power they could no longer deny. The courtroom doors swung open, and the tension in the lobby spilled inside like a storm refusing to be contained. The officers dragged Marcus forward, still cuffed, as if eager to prove their authority in front of the gallery already filling the benches. Their boots echoed across the polished floor, heavy, performative. The lead officer barked to the bailiff. "We've got a fraud trying to impersonate a judge. He was parading around in a suit, waving fake documents. Might want to clear the docket before he wastes everyone's time." His words rang loud enough for the jury pool waiting nearby to hear. A few gasps, a murmur of disbelief. Phones hovered again, though the court rules strictly forbid them. The bailiff hesitated. His eyes flicked to Marcus, studying him more carefully. Something in his posture didn't match the story. Marcus didn't look like a man caught in a lie, he looked like a man waiting. But the officers doubled down. One sneered. "Can you believe this guy? Thought he could walk into a federal courthouse and pretend to belong. Next thing you know, he'll be asking for a gavel." The gallery erupted into uneasy whispers. A junior attorney seated in the second row finally stood, voice clear and defiant. "That man doesn't need to pretend. That's Judge Marcus Hale. I clerked under him last summer." The room froze. Every eye swung toward Marcus, then back to the officers gripping his arms. The lead officer scoffed, too deep in denial to turn back. "Cute trick, counselor, but we're not buying it. A judge in cuffs? That's a fantasy." He yanked Marcus forward again. And then the absurdity escalated. One officer grabbed the folder of court orders Marcus had carried and flung it across the prosecutor's desk. "These are forgeries," he declared. Papers scattered across the polished wood, but the clerk nearest the bench recognized the seal instantly. Her voice cracked as she said, "These are signed motions for today's docket. They're real." The whispers swelled into shouts. "Check his name," someone urged. "Look at the roster." Another voice cut sharper. "You're humiliating your own judge." Still, Marcus remained silent. His stillness radiated through the chaos, a steady current under the noise. He didn't need to argue. Every second they spoke, they damned themselves further. The bailiff, now visibly uneasy, muttered, "I need verification." His hand hovered near the phone by the bench. The officers stiffened, sensing control slipping. "Don't waste your time," the lead officer said quickly. "He's a fraud, nothing more. Handle him before this room gets out of hand." But the room was already out of their hands. The gallery was rising, murmurs turning into open protest. The officers' laughter, once loud and certain, was thinning into silence. And as the clock ticked closer to session, it became clear they weren't escorting a criminal into this courtroom. They were dragging the very man who would soon preside over it. The prosecutor's desk was littered with Marcus's documents, but the lead officer wasn't finished. He picked up one motion stamped with the court seal, waved it like trash, then tore it straight down the middle. The rip echoed across the chamber, louder than his laugh. "Fake," he said flatly. "The man's a thief, nothing more." Gasps spread like wildfire. A woman in the gallery clutched her purse to her chest, her eyes wide. A man near the back stood and muttered, "You just destroyed evidence in open court." His phone trembled in his hand, already capturing the chaos. Marcus still didn't rise. His silence was sharper than any protest. He sat calmly at the defense table, cuffed, watching the storm build. But the officers pressed on, drunk on their own momentum. One shoved Marcus's briefcase off the table, papers scattering again. Another leaned close enough for the gallery to hear. "You really thought a nice suit and a fake name would buy you respect in this house? This isn't your world. You don't belong here." That phrase, "you don't belong here," hung in the room like smoke. The gallery shifted uneasily. A few whispered, "I've heard that before." The weight of history pressed into the walls. Then the lead officer made the fatal move. He reached for Marcus's shoulder, jerking him halfway up from his chair. "On your feet, fraud," he barked. "You're about to be processed." The room broke. Several voices shouted at once. "That's illegal! He hasn't even spoken! You can't treat him like this!" The bailiff stepped forward at last, his voice unsteady. "Enough. He hasn't been verified yet." But the officers ignored him, doubling down as though volume alone could mask their collapse. One officer smirked at the gallery, trying to hold his ground. "What? You all believe this man's a judge? Look at him. He doesn't look like any judge I've ever seen." It was a line meant to humiliate, but it backfired. Whispers turned into outrage. A law student in the gallery shouted, "Maybe that's the problem, you can't imagine a black man in power." The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the sound of the torn paper fluttering to the floor. Marcus lifted his head slowly, his eyes locking with the officers. He didn't need to raise his voice. The stillness in his gaze was enough. In less than 5 minutes, the session would begin. And when it did, the men who laughed, who ripped, who mocked, would no longer be the ones standing over him. They would be the ones standing beneath him. The courtroom was no longer orderly. The gallery buzzed with outrage, papers littered the floor like fallen leaves, and the officers who only minutes ago strutted with confidence were raising their voices louder, as if shouting could cover the cracks in their authority. Marcus sat still, hands bound in steel, but his composure radiated more control than their noise ever could. He glanced at the clock above the bench, 9:55 a.m., 5 minutes until session. His silence had been a shield. Now it became a weapon. He lifted his cuffed hands slightly, just enough for the gallery to see, and then looked toward the woman in gray who stood near the clerk's table. Their eyes met. She understood. A single nod from Marcus was all it took. She pulled out her phone and spoke into it softly, but the room caught every word. "Activate protocol." Her tone wasn't frantic. It was precise, almost rehearsed. Within seconds, her phone chimed with a confirmation. The lead officer snapped, "What did you just do? Hand that over." He lunged toward her, but before he could snatch the device, a voice came through the speaker, calm and authoritative. "This is the Office of Judicial Security. Judge Hale's credentials are live. Every biased remark and unlawful act in this chamber is being logged in real time." The gallery gasped. Phones tilted higher. The officers froze mid-motion, their bravado bleeding into confusion. The woman in gray raised the phone higher, the voice on speaker carrying like thunder. "His appointment, his oath, his docket, they're all on record. You've cuffed your presiding judge." The silence was immediate, deafening. Even the bailiff stepped back, his face pale. But the lead officer wasn't ready to yield. "It's a trick," he barked. His laugh was thin, desperate. "Anybody can fake a phone call." He turned to his partner. "Get the cuffs tighter. We finish this." His partner hesitated. The certainty was gone from his grip. The weight of 100 eyes bearing down made his hands shake. And then came the turning point. A junior clerk, trembling but steady in voice, stood and held up a laminated roster. "Today's docket, page 1. Judge Marcus Hale presiding." She slapped it against the table for the gallery to see. The seal glinted under the lights. The gallery erupted. Applause, shouts, disbelief colliding into one roar. "He's the judge!" They cuffed their own judge. Phones streamed live, captions already flooding across social media. The officers looked around, cornered not by walls but by truth. Their uniforms offered no protection from the weight of the moment. Marcus finally rose to his feet, still cuffed, still silent. But his posture commanded the room. He turned, eyes sweeping across the gallery, the officers, the bailiff, every soul who had witnessed their downfall. The woman in gray spoke again, her voice cutting through the noise. "Judge Hale, protocol has logged every word, every action. Do you wish to proceed to phase 2? Marcus gave the smallest nod. "Proceed." And just like that, the balance shifted. The cuffs no longer symbolized humiliation. They became the evidence. The officers who had laughed minutes before now stood pale and rigid, their careers unraveling in real time. The session hadn't even begun, yet justice was already in motion. 5 minutes remained, and the courtroom wasn't waiting for a gavel to fall. The reckoning had already started. The echo of Marcus's single word, "proceed," hung in the courtroom like a command issued from the bench, even though he was still standing in cuffs. The gallery quieted, phones raised high but steady, as if everyone sensed they were witnessing something historic. The woman in gray moved quickly, her phone still on speaker. "Verification complete," the voice announced. Judge Hale's appointment and authority confirmed, initiating judicial override. The words ricocheted off the walls, undeniable. The bailiff stepped forward, eyes wide. His hand trembled as he reached for the cuffs. For a moment, hesitation locked him in place. Then he clicked the mechanism open. The steel bands fell away, hitting the wooden table with a metallic finality. The sound was small, but it carried more weight than any gavel strike. Gasps swept the room. Some clapped instinctively. Others simply stared, stunned by the transformation. The man mocked, shackled, humiliated now, free, rising with the gravity of a storm about to break. Marcus didn't rush. He straightened his sleeves, buttoned his jacket, and looked each officer in the eye. His silence was no longer defensive, it was declarative. The lead officer tried to salvage the moment, his laugh brittle. This doesn't prove anything. He could have rigged all of this. It's a setup. People like him. His voice cracked before he could finish the sentence. Finish it, Marcus said quietly, his first direct word since being cuffed. The room froze. The officer's throat tightened. The words died in his mouth. Marcus stepped forward, each movement deliberate. The gallery leaned in. Even the bailiff lowered his head. A shame. The junior attorney who had spoken earlier lifted her voice again. I told you, he's Judge Hale. You tried to strip him of his dignity in his own courtroom. Her words, sharp as glass, cut through the officer's crumbling facade. Phones caught everything. The live streams were already filling with captions. They cuffed a sitting judge. They tried to erase him. Now he's standing taller than all of them. The woman in gray approached Marcus, handing him a small leather folder she'd kept hidden. Inside lay his judicial credentials, sealed with the federal crest. Marcus opened it slowly, turning it outward for the gallery and the officers to see. The seal gleamed under the courtroom lights. Silence spread like a wave, the kind of silence that carries shame. The officers' earlier laughter now sounded like echoes from another lifetime. Marcus closed the folder, his expression unshaken. He turned to the bailiff. Prepare the bench. The command was simple, but it landed like thunder. The bailiff nodded, scrambling toward the judge's dais. Chairs shifted. The gallery leaned forward, sensing the climax. The officers who had manhandled him now stood exposed, their authority crumbling with every second. Their eyes darted toward the exits, but there was no escape. The walls themselves seemed to press in, reminding them where they were, not in control, not in charge, merely subjects to the law they had just mocked. Marcus moved toward the bench, slow, deliberate. Each step erased their laughter, their insults, their arrogance. He wasn't just reclaiming his place, he was ascending to it. And when he reached the dais, the gallery rose to its feet, not because protocol demanded it, but because respect had become undeniable. The cuffs lay abandoned on the table, gleaming like relics of a mistake that would haunt those officers forever. And in their silence, one truth became clear. The man they tried to humiliate was now the one who would judge them. The shuffle of bodies rising to their feet filled the chamber. It wasn't orderly like a normal session, this was instinct, respect pulled from the gut. Phones hovered high, their lenses tracking Marcus as he ascended the steps toward the bench. The officers stood frozen, pale and rigid, as if the ground had been pulled out beneath them. Their earlier bravado had evaporated. The laughter that once echoed through the lobby now felt like a distant mistake replaying in their own heads. Marcus took his seat behind the bench with a calm gravity that silenced the last whispers in the gallery. He didn't need the gavel yet. His presence alone was enough. He adjusted his robe passed to him by the clerk with trembling hands and finally looked down upon the very men who had dragged him in chains minutes before. The lead officer swallowed hard, his throat bobbing. He muttered something about misunderstanding, about protocol, but the words cracked under the weight of the silence pressing on him from every direction. The gallery wasn't buying it. A man in the back shouted, "We saw everything." Another added, "You mocked him. You cuffed your own judge." The voices overlapped until the chamber buzzed with outrage again, only this time the fury wasn't directed at Marcus. Marcus raised one hand slightly, not even a full gesture, and the room fell still. That was power, quiet, controlled, absolute. He turned his gaze to the bailiff. Record today's proceedings. Every word, every action. The bailiff nodded quickly, already reaching for the log. Then Marcus's eyes shifted back to the officers. Their faces drained of color, uniforms no longer armor but evidence. "You sought to strip me of dignity before my own bench," he said evenly. "Now you will answer for it in front of the same public you tried to entertain." The gallery erupted in murmurs of approval. Cameras caught every angle, live streams climbing in viewers by the second. The lead officer tried once more, his voice breaking. "We didn't know who you were." Marcus's reply was razor sharp. And that's the indictment. You thought not knowing gave you permission. The silence that followed was heavier than any gavel strike. In less than 5 minutes, formal proceedings would begin, but the verdict in the court of public opinion was already sealed. The men who mocked him were no longer accusers. They were defendants waiting for judgment. The bench loomed higher than ever as Marcus settled into his chair, the black robe draped across his shoulders like armor. The officers stood below him now, stripped of their swagger, their uniforms suddenly feeling less like symbols of authority and more like evidence of misconduct. The gallery leaned forward, waiting, phones steady, silence thick. Everyone knew something irreversible was about to happen. Marcus lifted the docket from the clerk's trembling hands and placed it in front of him. He didn't slam the gavel, he didn't need to. His voice carried sharper than any strike of wood. "Effective immediately," he said. "The 4 officers involved in this morning's actions are suspended from duty pending a full judicial investigation." Gasps swept through the chamber. Some clapped, some cheered softly. Others simply sat in stunned awe. The officers, faces drained, tried to protest. The lead officer stammered, You can't do that without..." Marcus cut him off with a glance that silenced the room. "Without what? Without your permission. This courthouse does not run on your arrogance, it runs on law, and today, the law has spoken." The clerk typed rapidly, logging each word into the official record. The bailiff collected the officers' badges one by one, the metallic clicks echoing through the chamber. Each handover was a confession without words. The gallery erupted in murmurs again. A woman whispered, "They cuffed him, and now they're the ones stripped bare." A young man live-streaming muttered into his phone, "Justice in real time. They're being dismantled on their own stage." The lead officer tried again, desperation bleeding into his tone. "We were following protocol." Marcus leaned forward, his words cutting clean. "Protocol does not authorize humiliation. It does not excuse bias. It does not laugh in the face of dignity." He paused, letting the silence weigh heavy. "What you did was not procedure. It was prejudice." Ugh. The words landed like a gavel strike. Phones captured the exact moment the officer's composure cracked completely. One of them muttered, "We didn't know." But his partner beside him whispered back, bitter and low, "We didn't care." The gallery heard it. Gasps turned to outrage, and then applause. Marcus let the moment swell, then stilled it with a single sentence. "Your time above the law ends here." Oh. The officers' badges now sat on the bailiff's desk, powerless metal symbols of authority lost. And the crowd knew it wasn't just suspension. This was the beginning of something larger. The fall had only started. The chamber was electric phones raised, eyes wide, silence folding into applause that felt less like noise and more like a verdict. Marcus sat tall at the bench, every trace of humiliation erased, replaced by authority so undeniable it pressed into the air itself. The officers stood bare, badges gone, protests swallowed by the weight of their own actions. They had mocked him, dragged him, cuffed him, but now they were nothing more than defendants in a courtroom that no longer belonged to them. Marcus let the applause fade before speaking again. His voice was steady, unhurried, commanding. "I will not scream for justice," he said. "Justice does not need volume. It needs clarity." The words rolled through the chamber like scripture. He looked directly at the lead officer. "This morning you believed humiliation was a weapon. You believed laughter was power. But today you learned the truth. Power is not in mockery. It is in restraint. It is in dignity. It is in law." The gallery rose to its feet again, not because of custom, but because the moment demanded it. The applause thundered, shaking the walls, spilling into the hallway beyond. Live streams caught every second, captions multiplying across screens around the country. Judge Hale dismantled them in minutes. "Justice, live." Marcus stood, gathering his papers with deliberate calm. He glanced once at the cuffs, still lying on the prosecutor's desk, cold, useless metal that had tried to define him but instead defined those who wielded them. He left them there. He didn't need them as proof. The world had already seen. Before stepping down from the bench, Marcus delivered his final words, low but clear, each syllable carved into stone. "I am not the man you tried to parade. I am not the image you mocked. I am the judgment you feared and the judgment you earned." The gavel struck once, sharp and final. The gallery erupted, a chorus of applause and relief. Some wept, some shouted. All knew they had witnessed something that would not fade when the live streams ended. The officers were escorted out not in triumph, but in silence, and that silence carried the weight of their downfall. Marcus walked through the chamber, the robe flowing behind him, not as a costume, but as confirmation. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. His words remained, etched into every person who stood in that room. Justice had not shouted. Justice had not begged. Justice had stood, calm and unflinching, until mockery collapsed under its own weight. And as the doors closed behind him, one truth was left behind, unshakable. Dignity never needed to be loud. It only needed to be undeniable.